It was a cold, gray afternoon in the small town of Brookdale. The sky hung heavy with dark clouds, and the air inside Jefferson High School was unusually still. The day had dragged on with math tests, whispered gossip, and the usual restless chatter of teenagers waiting for the final bell. But no one expected that this ordinary Wednesday would end in terror. The final period had just begun. Students shuffled into classrooms, groaning under backpacks and textbooks. Teachers tried to keep order, but a strange tension lingered in the air. In room 204, English class was in session. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Miss Carter, a young teacher barely in her late 20s, wrote notes on the board. She spoke calmly. "All right, class. Today we're going to continue with Edgar Allan Poe. Page 56. Let's talk about fear, madness, and shadows of the mind." Jake, a student in the back, muttered jokingly, "Perfect, because this school gives me nightmares already." The class laughed and Ms. Carter smiled but replied sternly, "Settle down, Jake. You'll appreciate Poe one day. Maybe sooner than you think." Just as the laughter faded, the intercom crackled loudly. The principal's voice came, calm but oddly strained. "Attention, students. This is a lockdown. Repeat, the school is now under lockdown. Please remain in your classrooms. Teachers, follow procedures immediately." The room froze. Chairs creaked as everyone stopped mid-motion. Sarah whispered, "Is this a drill?" Kevin frowned. "They usually tell us when it's a drill." Miss Carter quickly ordered, "All right, everyone, stay calm. Move away from the windows. Get under your desks now." Students scrambled to obey. Miss Carter locked the door, turned off the lights, and crouched low in the corner. Silence swallowed the classroom. Then faintly at first came a sound. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps. Mia whispered, That doesn't sound like Officer Daniels." Jake tried to sound brave, but his voice cracked. "Probably just the janitor messing around." Ms. Carter hissed, "Quiet." The footsteps grew louder, stopping outside their door. The handle rattled. Click, click, rattle. Shadows moved under the gap at the bottom of the door. Then came the scratching. Long, sharp claws dragged down the wood. Scratch, scratch. Lily whimpered, "That's not human." The scratching stopped. Silence again. Then a voice outside the door, low, distorted, whispering, "Let me in." The students huddled closer together, eyes wide with terror. Miss Carter covered her mouth, shaking. Suddenly a loud bang shook the door. Bang, bang, bang. The whole wall rattled. Books tumbled off shelves, and students whimpered, holding back screams. Kevin whispered in panic, "It's gonna break through. We need to run." Miss Carter snapped sharply, "No." Then, as suddenly as it started, the banging stopped. Silence. Too much silence. They held their breath, straining to hear. And then a sound came from the intercom again. First it was static, then faint whispers, dozens of them, overlapping, as though a crowd was muttering inside the speakers. Finally one clear phrase cut through, "They are already inside." The students looked at each other in horror. Mia whispered, trembling, "What does that mean?" Before anyone could answer, the fluorescent lights flickered violently and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. The only sound was breathing, and then a faint shuffle in the corner of the classroom. Someone gasped. Miss Carter's flashlight clicked on, the beam shaking as it swept across desks and students, until it landed on a tall, shadowy figure standing in the far corner. Its face was featureless, black like smoke, but its eyes burned a faint white glow. The students screamed, and the light flickered out. In the pitch dark, the sound of desks scraping and nails dragging across the floor filled the air. Jake yelled, "Run!" But Miss Carter hissed, "No, stay down." But it was too late. Something rushed across the room with an inhuman growl. The intercom blared static and then laughter. Children's laughter. Twisted, echoing, wrong. Sarah cried softly, "Why is this happening?" Miss Carter tried to keep her voice steady. "Everyone stay together. Don't separate." But then the classroom door creaked open on its own. The lock had never been broken, and yet it swung wide, revealing a pitch-black hallway. Beyond it, faint figures shifted, their shapes barely human. Some crawling on the floor, some hanging from the ceiling like broken marionettes. Kevin whispered, "We have to get out of here." Against her better judgment, Miss Carter agreed. Quietly. Stay close. They slipped into the hallway, shoes squeaking faintly. Every shadow seemed alive. The school was unrecognizable. Lockers stood twisted, like they'd melted. Windows showed not the stormy afternoon but endless black void. The sound of footsteps followed them, though none of them moved. Sarah pointed, trembling. It's behind us. They turned and saw nothing. Just empty hall. But when they turned back, half the students were gone. Gone without a sound. Only silence where they had been. No, 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 Miss Carter whispered. Stay together. The remaining students ran down the hallway, breathless, until they reached the gym. They slammed the doors shut, pushing bleachers in front of them. In the center of the gym floor, emergency lights glowed red, casting long shadows. What's happening to us? Lily sobbed. Miss Carter held her close. I don't know, but we'll survive. We have to. Then the scoreboard on the wall flickered on by itself. Numbers scrolled rapidly, then froze. 666. The buzzer blared, deafening, and the gym doors shook violently. Something was trying to get in. The bleachers slid across the floor by themselves, dragged by invisible force. Miss Carter screamed, Run! They bolted through the back exit of the gym into the locker rooms. The air smelled of rot and iron. Showers dripped, though no water line was running. In the reflection of the mirrors, the students saw themselves, not as they were, but as pale corpses with hollow eyes. Sarah collapsed, sobbing. We're already dead. We're already dead. Miss Carter shook her. No, don't say that. The whispers grew louder, surrounding them. Join us, join us, join us. The locker doors banged open and shut violently, echoing like gunfire. The group fled again, this time down the stairwell toward the basement. But when they reached the bottom, the door was chained shut. Behind them, something descended the stairs. Heavy, slow, a grotesque figure, its limbs bent backward, its mouth too wide, stretching into an endless grin. Its voice gurgled, I found you? The student screamed, shoving at the basement door until it burst open. They tumbled inside and slammed it shut. Darkness engulfed them. Miss Carter fumbled with her phone flashlight, but when the beam came on, the basement was filled with rows of desks, and sitting at each desk were exact replicas of her students. Their heads turned in unison. Their eyes glowed faintly. The real students backed up in terror. Jake whispered, This is a nightmare. Please wake me up. The replicas all spoke at once, voices overlapping, distorted. You already woke up. The lights blew out. Screams echoed in the dark. The story continues with the group splitting, some being dragged away by unseen hands, others lured by voices of their parents calling from the shadows. Miss Carter fights to keep the survivors together, but one by one, they vanish. The whispers reveal that the lockdown was never ordered by the principal at all. It was the school itself, alive and feeding. The building shifts, halls stretch endlessly, clocks spin backward. The survivors find themselves looping back to the same classroom they started in, but now it's decayed, filled with bloodstains and broken desks. The intercom finally clicks on one last time, and the voice of the principal speaks, distorted and hollow. Lockdown complete. All students accounted for. The last thing they see is the door swinging shut, trapping them forever as the school consumes them. Their screams becoming part of the whispers for the next lockdown. I've driven cross-country more times than I can count. There's something peaceful about empty highways at night, the hum of the tires, the way headlights carve tunnels through darkness. But after one night in 2016, I stopped driving alone after midnight. It happened somewhere in New Mexico, off Interstate 40. I was hauling inventory for my small antique business. Nothing crazy, just boxes of old signs and clocks I'd picked up in Texas. It was around 1 a.m., and I'd been driving since noon. My eyes were burning. I told myself I'd pull into the next rest stop, grab some coffee, maybe a nap. About 10 minutes later, I saw the blue sign, rest area, 2 miles. Perfect. When I pulled in, the place was completely empty. No trucks, no cars, no lights, except one flickering street lamp near the restrooms. It was an old layout, the kind built in the 70s, low concrete building, soda machines outside, picnic tables half buried in sand. As I got out, I felt the air shift. The wind had that sharp desert chill, the kind that sneaks through your jacket. The silence was deep, heavier than it should have been. I remember thinking, weird, no other travelers? I walked toward the vending machines, hoping to grab a Coke. When I got close, I realized both were unplugged. The lights inside were off. I laughed quietly, a little uneasy, and decided to use the restroom before heading back out. Inside, the fluorescent light buzzed faintly. The air smelled like dust and something metallic. I finished up quickly and splashed water on my face. When I looked up into the mirror, the light flickered once. And I swear, for half a second, I saw a man standing behind me. He was in the far corner of the room, near the last stall. Tall, still, wearing a denim jacket. His face was blurred by the flickering light. I spun around. No one. The stalls were all open and empty. I even kicked them one by one to be sure. The sound echoed off the tiles like gunshots. My pulse was hammering. I told myself it was exhaustion. I'd been driving for 13 hours. I needed caffeine and sleep, not ghost stories. When I stepped outside again, something was different. There was a car parked next to mine. A black Buick. Maybe late 80s, early 90s. The paint was dull, but the headlights were on, dim yellow like dying eyes. I hadn't heard it pull up. The driver's door was open. Nobody inside. I stood there for a full minute, waiting for someone to appear. No sound. Just the wind. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was no license plate. Not front, not back. I backed slowly toward my car, never taking my eyes off the Buick. The wind picked up, blowing sand against my face. The rest stop light buzzed overhead. And then, the Buick's engine turned off. Not died off. Turned off. Like someone inside had twisted the key. I jumped in my truck, slammed the locks, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the keys. As my headlights came on, they washed over the Buick one last time, and I swear I saw movement inside. A shadow shifting. But I didn't wait to check. I floored it out of there. 5 miles later, I pulled into a gas station. One of those all-night ones with fluorescent lights and country music playing from the speakers. The clerk, an older woman, asked if I was okay. Apparently, I looked pale as death. I told her what I'd seen, laughing nervously like it was a dumb story. When I mentioned the rest stop, her face went still. "You mean the one about 20 miles back?" she asked. I nodded. She just stared at me for a second, then shook her head. "Son, that place has been closed since 2003. They tore it down after the murders." My stomach dropped. "Murders?" "Yeah," she said quietly. "A couple on a road trip stopped there one night. Never made it back to their car. Cops found the Buick still running. No plates. Nobody inside. Whole area's supposed to be condemned now." I didn't say a word after that. When I got back on the road, I checked the GPS out of curiosity. No rest stop appeared on the map. Nothing for 30 miles in either direction. To this day, I don't know what I stumbled into. Maybe my mind played tricks on me. Maybe I nodded off and dreamed it all. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving past an empty stretch of highway, I see a flicker of yellow headlights in my rearview mirror. And every time, they vanish before I can blink. I used to live in Cleveland, Ohio, in a rundown apartment building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the late 80s. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and at the time, that's all I could afford. The building had 6 floors, paper-thin walls, and that strange smell old buildings get. Something between dust and moldy carpet. Most of the residents were quiet and kept to themselves. The only time anyone gathered was when the fire alarm went off, which happened every couple of months for no reason. I lived on the 2nd floor, apartment 207. Across the hall was apartment 213, and for the first 3 months I lived there, it was empty. The landlord told me it was under renovation, but I never saw anyone going in or out. The blinds were always shut, and the door was always locked. Then, one morning, I woke up to the sound of furniture moving. Thumps, dragging noises, a hammer tapping against the wall. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a man moving in. He looked to be in his mid-40s, tall and thin, with messy dark hair and a faded army jacket. He was carrying boxes labeled books and kitchen, though he dropped one and didn't even flinch when the contents shattered across the floor. I opened my door slightly and said, "Hey, need a hand?" He turned toward me, and for a second, I regretted asking. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes sunk deep into their sockets. He smiled, but it wasn't natural, it was too slow. Then, about 10 seconds later, came 3 slow knocks from his side, like an answer. The next morning, I ran into the landlord, Mrs. Hines, in the lobby. I mentioned the noise. She frowned. "That apartment isn't supposed to be occupied." I blinked. "What?" "The guy moved in last week." She shook her head slowly. No one signed a lease for 213. It's been sealed off for years. I told her I'd seen him with my own eyes. She looked at me like she didn't believe me, but she handed me the master key and said, "Show me." When we got upstairs, I knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Nothing. So she unlocked it. The door creaked open. The smell hit us first, rot and something metallic. Inside, the apartment was dark except for a single bare bulb swinging from the ceiling. The air was heavy, humid. I stepped in behind her, calling out, "Hello!" The place was empty. No furniture, no boxes, no curtains, nothing. Just an old metal folding chair in the center of the living room. But here's the thing. The chair was facing the wall that connected to my apartment. And all over that wall were hundreds of small holes, like someone had been poking through it with a screwdriver. When I leaned closer, I realized each hole was drilled right through the drywall into my apartment. I felt sick. Mrs. Hines whispered something under her breath and backed toward the door. We left immediately and called the police. When they arrived, they searched every inch of 213. They didn't find anyone. No fingerprints, no personal items. Nothing. But they did find something that made my blood run cold. In one of the holes, a small piece of paper was stuffed inside. It had my name written on it, in neat, careful handwriting. The cops told me to stay with a friend for a few days while they investigated. When I came back, the door to 213 was sealed with police tape. I never saw the man again. 2 weeks later, I decided to move out. I didn't care about breaking my lease. As I packed my things, I heard someone knocking softly from the wall again. 3 times, slow and steady. I froze. My furniture was already gone, so the sound echoed loud. I pressed my ear to the wall. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice, barely a whisper. "I liked watching you." I stumbled backward so fast I nearly fell. I grabbed my keys, bolted out the door, and never looked back. A few months later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online for anything about apartment 213 in that building. There it was, an old newspaper article from 2009. Local man arrested for stalking neighbor through hidden wall holes. His name and description matched the man I'd seen perfectly. He'd disappeared after making bail and was never found again. That's when I realized something terrifying. The building wasn't haunted. It was just old